Take a network break. I'm Drew Conry Murray.
I'm Jonna Johnson, and help yourself to a virtual donut as we speed walk through today's news. Today we'll be covering the NVIDIA investment in Intel, a lot of news from Google, a lot of news from Google, a Checkpoint acquisition, the long-awaited public offering of Netskope, and more. But first, Drew, a word from our sponsor.
Yeah, today's episode sponsor is Meter. Meter delivers full-stack networking infrastructure from wired to wireless to cellular in a single integrated solution that scales from branch offices and warehouses and large campuses to data centers. Go to meter.com/networkbreak to book a demo now. That's meter.com/networkbreak to book a demo now. And just a note to let you know that we have launched the newest podcast on the Packet Pushers channel. It's called Life in Uptime with Kevin Nans and Alexis Bertholf. They'll be talking with folks about their tech and IT career journeys. The first episode's dropping in a few weeks, and there's a preview episode up now with Alexis and Kevin talking with Ethan Banks about the coming together of the show. So go check it out if you're looking for more podcasts in your feed. All right, Jonna, let's hit the red alert.
Okay, there is a remote code execution in an AI tool from NVIDIA. Just for some context, 1,339 CVEs were created the week ending September 18th, and 2,450 were updated. Of those, 248 were critical with a CVSS of 9 or more, and 18 got that perfect 10 out of 10. The one we're choosing to highlight this week is a remote code execution bug in NVIDIA's Triton Inference Server, scored at 9.8. The source of a problem is a failure to properly neutralize special elements in an OS command in the Python backend of the tool. So the net effect is that an attacker can, through manipulation of the parameter model name in calls to the model control API, execute arbitrary code remotely. It might also allow for data theft, data tampering, and denial of service attacks. The bug exists in all versions on Windows and Linux prior to version 25.08, and the fix is, wait for it, upgrade to the current release, 25.08. The upgrade also fixes 4 other lower scoring CVEs affecting the server. So upgrade now if you're using NVIDIA's tool.
A little upgrading can get you a 5 for 1.
There you go.
Yeah.
And speaking of NVIDIA, the much bigger news this week is its investment, sort of surprise investment, or actually last week, of $5 billion in Intel. Back on Thursday, it announced it's investing $5 billion in Intel to develop multiple generations of data center and PC chips, including integrating NVIDIA's NVLink interface onto Intel chips. Intel says it will manufacture x86 system-on-chips that incorporate chiplets of NVIDIA's RTX GPUs with the goal of competing effectively against AMD and others. According to Reuters, the stake instantly makes NVIDIA, I would say, the second largest shareholder, giving it roughly 44% of the company. That's after the 10% that the U.S. government owns. Intel's stock popped nearly 30% in early trading this morning. Drew, thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess in general, I feel like NVIDIA's real motivation for doing this is because of the fact that the U.S. government now owns a 10% stake in Intel. And my larger criticism is that I don't like the government having a 10% stake in Intel. This is doing exactly what capitalists say they don't like. Market actors are now making political decisions to appease a president rather than deciding on the best use of their resources. I think if I was a big NVIDIA shareholder, I'd be like, why are you pledging billions to prop up this flailing company? I don't know, your take.
The counter-argument, I agree with you and have said so heatedly, and certainly if you put a libation in my hand, whether caffeinated or alcoholic, I will be even more heated. But the real question here is, one thing to keep in mind is, Intel has chip fabs, including the next generation advanced chip manufacturing plants in its foundry. And the real question is whether NVIDIA is hedging its bets here. Supposedly, NVIDIA has explicitly said that the deal does not cover manufacturing in any of Intel's chip plants. But if U.S. strategy towards offshore chip manufacturing continues to harden, or if geopolitical considerations like China invading Taiwan make it necessary to have onshore fabs, this is a great easy step in for NVIDIA. So I think there is a strategic value to NVIDIA, even though they sort of went to some lengths to deny that they're actually caring about that particular value. But what they say and what they do are obviously two different things.
Yeah.
But to back up your point, Drew, it's worth noting that I don't think we paid a whole lot of attention to it, but right after the US government took its 10% stake, SoftBank jumped in and said, oh, here's $2 billion. So now we've got NVIDIA, and it looks like I think it's probably safe to guess that any tech vendor that wishes to curry favor with the US administration is likely to do the same. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if Apple or Tesla or IBM or Microsoft or name your favorite tech vendor that decides to look good throws a couple $1 billion Intel's way, because effectively Intel has gotten the stamp of approval by the US government and can't be allowed to fail without the US government looking stupid.
Right, that's what I mean. This is just about, sort of currying favor and kissing up to an administration rather than is this the most effective use of our resources, which I think is a bad thing, especially given the fact that you said NVIDIA isn't necessarily committing that $5 billion to the construction of chip fabs in the US, which was sort of the rationale of the US taking the stake in Intel. Anyway, Intel was getting grants from the US government to onshore chip manufacturing, to onshore really high-end chip manufacturing here in the US. And now that turned into, well, we're taking 10% of the company in exchange for that. So NVIDIA not committing to helping that, which is sort of the whole goal, also makes me feel like, okay, this is bad. I guess my other problem with this, with currying favor with the US government around Intel, does this mean like, what if it produces inferior quality products? Are companies going to have to buy bad chips just to sort of keep the government happy? What if the government decides that all federal spending on chips should go to Intel, whether or not Intel has the best product or price? I feel like with the US as a stakeholder and an administration that is really not afraid to use its leverage to force private companies to behave in a way the administration wants, it's kind of like turning Intel into, it's not a monopoly, but it's a company that's starting to feel divorced from any kind of real competitive pressure, given that it's got the government on its side kind of tipping the balance.
Well, all I can say is you would get a hearty agreement from a most unexpected source, which would be the Russian military, which is really pissed off that it's got crappy tools and weapons because of exactly the dynamic you've talked about. So I'm sure there's lots of Russian soldiers listening to this podcast going, yeah, you're right, Drew. But just to wrap this one up, I have to admit that I reached out to some friends of mine who are current and former senior executives at both companies. Both of them had kind of the same take, which is very similar to yours. But I also have to say that the Intel folks are not complaining about the bump in the stock portfolio.
Absolutely
the
not.
The NVIDIA folks actually are okay too, but they had the same complaint of, look, this isn't going to force Intel to be a better competitor. So
I feel like AMD is probably also standing there like, hey, WTF, what is happening here?
Right. Well, we know what they need to do. I mean, come on, AMD. Hello. Cough, cough. The tin cup is rattling.
That's right.
So there we go. Anyway, that was today's or last week's interesting news. Drew, you have something about Checkpoint.
Yeah, so links in the show notes if you want to read up more about the whole NVIDIA thing. And we're also happy to get your feedback if if you're feeling heated like Jonna or myself on either end of that debate. It is up at packetpushers.net/FU. We'd love to get some comments and some feedback, and we'll follow up with it in subsequent episodes. But moving on, Checkpoint has acquired an AI security startup called Lakera. Lakera offers both pre-deployment and runtime security for AI models, for LLMs, AI agents, and AI workflows. I think one thing that's kind of unique to Lakera, they developed a product called Gandalf that invites anyone like you or I ever, can you just go sign up and you can try playing with prompt injection attacks to get past this Gandalf's AI defenses. And that's cool because what Lakera is essentially getting is sort of like, crowdsourced security training that it can then use for its own product development. So pretty clever. And I think that's one of the reasons Checkpoint may have been interested. Lakera raised around $21 million in a Series A funding round in 2024. Checkpoint didn't explicitly say how much they paid, but I've seen other websites to say the deal is valued at $300 million. So that is a nice win for Lakera.
Yeah, and it's actually not a bad move for Checkpoint for the reasons you said. I have to, my hat's off to Checkpoint because basically they've lasted 25 years or whatever it is on, essentially one major invention, the firewall. And it used to be Checkpoint was the Kleenex of firewalls. You would say you'd get a checkpoint when you meant a firewall. And I think sticking to their knitting in the sense of being firewalls But jumping into the AI era is actually on point for them and probably a very, very good move across the board. So
Yeah, they've in their press release they mentioned they're already investing in AI to help, improve the quality of their own security products, but this also now gives them AI tools specifically designed for protecting LLMs, AI models, AI agents, et cetera, which is going to be a whole huge interesting new attack surface that we'll probably talk about a little bit later in the show.
yep. Speaking of attacks and attack surfaces, Google has confirmed the fraudulent access to its law enforcement request portal. A group of threat actors calling itself Scattered Lapsus Hunters issued a claim on Telegram that it had gained access to both Google's law enforcement request system, LERS platform, and to the FBI's e-check background check system. Google has confirmed to the Register and to Bleeping Computer on September 15th that, in fact, this is the case. Hackers created a fraudulent account in LERS, the system that is used to submit official requests for Google customer data. Google spokespeople also said that the account had then been disabled, no requests were actually used, and no data was issued, and no data was accessed. The FBI has not been quite as forthcoming. They haven't said anything about it. But that's a fairly straightforward problem. Anytime you create backdoors, whether process or technical or both, you create the possibility of bad guys using those back doors. And so this is kind of a, sun rises in east sort of announcement. But what makes it different is that it's Google and that they in fact confirmed that it had happened.
Okay, so the idea here is that this attack group could have used that access to say, hey, we're a law enforcement agency. We need data on XYZ. Please send it to us.
Exactly.
Okay.
Hi, we are the law enforcement agency of East Nowhere, and we need information about Drew Conry Murray's, expenditures or whatever.
Right. On whatever you got
and
on these
and
people. And yeah, okay.
exactly.
Okay.
So there you
Interesting.
go.
Okay. But Google says they've shut it down.
Google said they shut it down before anything happened. This smells a lot like a, test drive, proof of
Right.
concept kind of thing.
Right.
I'm not going to speculate on their motivation on announcing it, other than sometimes threat actors like to just give big companies and government agencies a black eye. But it does highlight a risk, and that's kind of why I'm raising it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a little street cred for Scattered Lapsus Hunters. If you're trying to get your name out there, you can be like, hey, see what we did to Google.
Exactly. See what we did to Google. I don't know. I once earned my living breaking into things. Not that I should announce this very loudly. And we always did try to make sure, since we were white hat, we always made sure that things were wrapped up and fixed before we ever announced our accomplishments. But
Okay, so you were breaking in with permission. Just want to clarify.
well, yes and no. We were running lab tests, and so the expectation on the part of the vendors was that the lab tests would show their products were awesome, and when we found that they were vulnerable, if they were security products, they got mad. One of my claims to fame is actually that I managed to break two-factor authentication when RSA first introduced it. That's a long story that will require a libation, but in any event, RSA was not happy.
I bet. Well, there's a couple of times now where I feel like we gotta get you a beer because
right?
there's some stories here.
Indeed.
All right, moving on. Netskope, that's a startup maybe not a startup, but they're a vendor in the SASE market. They went public last week. Their IPO raised $908 million on their first day of trading. The company has been valued at $8.8 billion. This is a good debut, but Netskope has its work cut out for it. The SASE market is hotly contested. Netskope's got to compete against market leaders like Palo Alto Networks and Fortinet. There's also big name vendors in the space, Cisco and Checkpoint. There are also SASE specialists, Zscaler, Cato Networks, Versa Networks, and others. So I think one challenge for Netskope is that many of its competitors, particularly on the networking side, have a strong presence in SD-WAN. That gives them a point of leverage in trying to sign up customers for the cloud security side of SASE. Netskope does have an SD-WAN portfolio. I don't think it's as well known as other SD-WAN offerings. So I'm assuming that Netskope's task is now to raise its profile in the market. It's got $900 million in the bank to do that and a high valuation. And as we said earlier, maybe they could see if the federal government wants a 10% stake.
There you go. I will say that depending on how you define market, most of my enterprise clients have made commitments to Netskope at some point in their security journeys. So I think they may be stronger than is generally known in the enterprise space, or at least the big enterprise space, the Fortune 50 kinds of companies. So it's possible that they're able to take this increased profile and go down market a bit more. or something else. I'm not sure. I am speaking hypothetically. I have not looked at the exact layout of the exact demographic of their customer base. I can just tell you that they have surprising inroads in big companies. So I think they're pretty well positioned. As you said, they're going up against some pretty serious competitors. But, hey, if I've got almost $1 billion in cash to do it with, that's not the end of the world.
Not the end of the world. And we will now have an opportunity every quarter to see how they're doing. All right, pausing for a quick word from sponsor Meter. Meter delivers full stack networking, wired, wireless, and cellular to leading enterprises. It is a single integrated solution with everything included, and I mean everything. You get ISP procurement, security, routers, switches, wireless APs, firewalls, cellular, power, DNS security, VPN, SD-WAN, and multi-site workflows. Meter has designed the hardware, written the firmware, and built the software, so it is a truly integrated solution. And alongside their partners, Meter designs, deploys, and manages everything required at your site or sites so that you get performant, reliable, and secure connectivity. So if you're ready for fast, secure, and scalable connectivity without the complexity of managing multiple providers or tools, it's time to check out Meter. Go to meter.com/networkbreak and you can book a demo now. That's meter.com/networkbreak, and network break is all one word, and book that demo. We thank Meter for being a sponsor.
All right. And back to security news, because there seems to be a lot of it today. SonicWall's cloud backup has been compromised and customer configs have been stolen. SonicWall firewall customers using their cloud backup service for configuration files face a risk of data exposure, according to SonicWall's incident report, which is in the show notes. The company claims that through a series of brute force attacks, attackers gained access to the backup service and were able to get to and download those backed up config files. SonicWall claims as of the 18th that only about 5% of users were affected and that all credential info was encrypted, but they acknowledge that just knowing the firewall's configuration potentially offers attackers useful information for engineering a breach. SonicWall therefore urges folks who have used the cloud backup feature to do an essential credential reset, apparently as insurance against brute force cracking of those credentials, and to watch for additional guidance from the company. This actually highlights a much bigger issue, which I've had conversations with enterprises about in the recent weeks. With a lot of what's been going on with ransomware attacks, people neglect to look at their backups and ensure that their backups are regularly scanned and highly secure, scanned for ransomware Easter eggs. So one of the things that bubbled up about a decade ago now was that ransomware attackers were smart enough to know that companies would reinstall configurations from backed up configurations and backed up data, and were smart enough to put badness in those backups. So just a reminder, if you are not carefully checking backups, where backups are and how well protected they are, you probably want to start. That's not directly relevant to this because obviously this was stuff that was backed up, firewall configured, backed up by the firewall vendor. But still, it's indicative of a broader problem.
Yeah, I'm really curious about this brute force attack element too, because that's to me a little worrisome. It seems like that's a hard way to go and shouldn't be all that effective, and yet they managed to make a brute force attack work. So I'm sure SonicWall's not saying much about it, but I'd be interested to hear more about how that happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
Moving on, Google's adding its Gemini AI to its Chrome browser for all Mac and Windows Chrome users in the United States. Google says Gemini in Chrome, quote, can understand the context of what you're doing across multiple tabs, answer questions, and integrate with other popular Google services like Google Docs and Calendar. Google says Gemini in Chrome works across multiple tabs that you have open to summarize and consolidate information, answer questions about articles, and do things like summarize YouTube videos. Google in its blogs offers an example of like planning a trip. If you've got tabs open to book flights and rent a hotel and reserve a car, it can consolidate all of that information into a single itinerary. I think the interesting thing here is that in the coming months, Google says it's going to roll out agentic AI capabilities that will do more than just like summarize things. The Google agent will do things like order your groceries online, schedule appointments for you, and take other actions. One thing that jumped out at me is yet another feature where you can find web pages you previously visited instead of digging through, your history or looking for that website name. You prompt Gemini to find it for you. Google gives examples of such as, what was the website that I saw the walnut desk on last week? Or what was that blog I read on back to school shopping? And that caught my eye because on the one hand, it's definitely useful. On the other hand, Google's not providing a lot of detail about how it's storing information about your site visits. And it recalled to mind the controversy about Microsoft Recall, which, as you might remember, was a feature in a Windows version that captured and stored screenshots of applications, web pages, and documents. And there was a huge backlash because of privacy concerns. So here it sounds like Google's doing more than just capturing URLs. It's understanding the context of those pages and storing that context, which seems a little bit more invasive to me. John, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I kind of see this as yet another example of AI fixing a problem that's not actually a problem. Because the two examples that you gave are actually very, very, very easy to do. You just search on walnut in your history, you search on back to school in your history, and the chances are 99 out of 100 that the website will pop up immediately. So, yeah, I'm very suspicious of this, and my reaction to this particular piece of news was, oh, well, Chrome, it was fun while I had you. I certainly have no desire to have Google, Google deliver all of this. I don't need this problem solved. And in fact, the whole agentic AI component scares me silly because, as we know and we've talked about on previous shows, agentic AI doesn't actually work all that well. And so you may find yourself with hotel reservations in a hotel that doesn't exist. Which kind of sucks when you get off the plane and in the middle of the night jet lagged. So, no, you're not helping me, Google. Go away.
Well, you're going to love this next story then,
Right?
because it is probably not a coincidence that around the same time Google launched Gemini and Chrome with the promises of agentic AI to do your shopping coming later. Google has also announced the Agents Payment Protocol, or AP2. AP2 is an open protocol that aims to, quote, securely initiate and transact agent-led payments across platforms. And the idea here is to have a secure method for agents and merchants to prove that users have authorized an agent to make a purchase, ensuring that the agent's request actually matches what the user intended, and having mechanisms to deal with fraudulent transactions. The protocol is going to rely on cryptographically signed digital contracts to verify user instructions. Google says AP2 can support multiple payment types, including credit and debit cards, stablecoins, and bank transfers. Google developed the protocol with partners including American Express, MasterCard, PayPal, Coinbase, and many others, and is inviting the broader industry to get on board with AP2 to help drive agentic payment systems. I bring this up because I assume that if you are an e-commerce company, a financial institution, or any other business touched by the payment industry, whether it's AP2 or some other protocol, they're going to be coming hard and fast at you. So best to start investigating now.
Yeah, and I have a lot of concerns with this particular protocol and the use of it, as you might imagine. Then again, I'm one of those people that still pulls out these sort of crumpled green things, and clerks look at me funny when I do that. Like, what is that? It's called cash, guys. So, so yeah, I'm not enthused by this, and I do have a lot of concerns about AP2 and how it is implemented, but we shall see. I mean, I'm not completely a Luddite, but I have to say that unless we have completely auditable backends for these things, I'm not in a huge hurry to use them. All right.
Nor am I, but I know there are people out there who are really interested in streamlining their lives as much as possible and may be willing to take a risk here. So we'll see what kind of take up this kind of like letting an AI agent buy things on my behalf, what kind of take up we get.
Well, if you take 5 steps back and look at all of this together, you realize how much great fun you could have if you can hack AI so that you can buy lots of things on somebody else's account. And I can't wait till we hear about that. But in any event, all right. So moving on to not a security bug. Cloudflare has self-owned with its user interface tweak. In its deep dive explanation of a 2-hour, 40-minute outage on the dashboard and many APIs on September 12th, Cloudflare says it was our fault. I mean, very specifically, they said the root cause was a code tweak to the dashboard that caused it to call their tenant service API way, way, way too often. Quoting their blog entry on the issue, the API calls were managed by a React use effect hook, but we mistakenly included a problematic object in its dependency array. Because this object was recreated on every state or prop change, React treated it as always new, causing React use effect to rerun each time. So basically, the dashboard made that API call so many times for every dashboard render, instead of just once, it essentially set up a DDoS attack in itself. Compounding the self-DDoS on the tenant service API, the dashboard tweak was introduced at the same time as a service update on the tenant service API itself, which increased the instability and led to the service ultimately being overwhelmed and failing to recover. The degradation and then failure of the tenant service API caused cascading failures in not just the dashboard, but other APIs as well. There are links in the show notes, but kudos to Cloudflare for an in-depth technical explanation that boils down to, sorry guys, we screwed up. I wish more companies would do that.
Yeah, I actually really do appreciate when, tech companies open up the curtain a little bit to say, yeah, this is what happened and why, and the steps we're taking to fix it, because it is embarrassing for a company like Cloudflare to have an outage of any kind, but particularly of that length, and particularly for something they did themselves. So yeah, not great, but tip of the hat for them to owning up to it and explaining why. I always do appreciate that.
Yeah, and I've always found, having been in the business of working with customers for, 25 years, if something breaks, the best thing you can do is say, yes, it broke. This is what happened. This is the process failure that
Right.
led to it. We are terribly sorry that it inconvenienced you. Here is what we're going to do to make things better. And by the way, here's what we're going to do to ensure that such things will never happen in future. And the net consequence of that is your customers love you. So, hey, I'll take it.
Right. It sounds maybe counterintuitive, but it can actually build trust if you fess up and say, yeah, we're fixing it and it was our fault.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
a good thing. Yeah. Well, that does wrap up the news. Jonna, where can folks get more from you online?
Please hit me up at Substack. That's nemerdes.substack.com. You'll see that one of the top features is actually our analysis of the NVIDIA Intel investment. And there's a lot of other fun stuff out there as well, including links to this podcast and others.
And I'm Drew Conry Murray. I'm on Blue Sky at DrewCM, and I'm blogging at packetpushers.net. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Thanks to our sponsor, Meter. And thanks to you for listening. Don't forget, we've got merch, more than a dozen podcasts you can subscribe to, an industry blog, 2 weekly newsletters, our community Slack group, a YouTube channel, an IRC group, and more. You can find everything at packetpushers.net, all free, no login required. And as always, thanks for listening.